Dr. Richard C. Miller. I heard this argument a long time ago from Robert and Price on my channel that Justin Martyr is comparing Jesus to other figures. Some of them are dying and rising, or some have ascensions or stuff like that. And many Christians have engaged with us and said, nah, this is not what's happening here. So I read your book, of course, Resurrection and Reception, and I've gone over it a few times. Page 5, though, you have some sources listed here. And in those sources are about when Justin Martyr compares Jesus to sons of Zeus and Caesars and such. He also adds like this caveat in his discussion that it was evil demons or Satan that like made the others look like Jesus. Sounds like the best get out of jail free card I've ever heard of, at least according to them, because we're going to dive into what the arguments from Kelsus and stuff might have been, but evil demons, and you mentioned other church fathers, so if they want to go, well, Justin Martyr wasn't meaning that. He was just trying to get out of the wiggle room of being killed as a martyr. After reading Ignatius, when you sent me that one, I'm like, was he trying to get out of it? Who knows? These people were ready to go to die for real. Yeah. Begging to die, Ignatius was. So was Justin Martyr in the same vein? I'll leave that for the audience to maybe assume maybe there's something going on. But you mentioned Tertullian, and he's got multiple sources, Apology, Natural something, MARC, you have source. Minucius Felix, and his has one that looks...
Municius Felix, yeah.
Municius Felix. Origen, in his Kelsus, and Theophilus. I don't even know what the source is, but it's listed on page 5 of the book. There's probably more.
Those are just examples.
What is going on? Tell us in your own words, what is Justin doing? What is Tertullian doing? What is Origen doing? Theophilus, I'm not even going to butcher the name here. What are they all doing?
Well, there was a problem when the earliest, writings arose in the first century and early second century, that what we find, finding their way into the New Testament, the Gospels. Those initially were launched basically with the effort to paint Jesus as a kind of demigod, right? He's the son of a god, and this sort of, and they're drawing on a lot of these same kind of tropological signals, cultic signals, a lot of the same patterns. They're setting up another franchise next door to all the other franchises that are out there, putting this in the marketplace of ideas, in the marketplace of religious kind of constructs and communities and that sort of thing. And so it's lined up and fitting many of the same patterns that we would find if you were to create any other cult in that time that was around a particular founding figure. And so in the second century, the dial is turning a little bit more. Now they're starting to get traction, and it's starting to feel like their sights are on at another level. They need to start distinguishing now Jesus from those figures. It wasn't enough that he should be installed as an exciting Near Eastern, variety or permutation of this. They needed to be obsoleting the prior, basically the foundation, as not valid any longer, and that this is the one true way. And so that starts to turn up the heat. They start turning up the heat on that. And so that's where you find the second century and third century people oftentimes especially the apologists, dealing with this elephant in the room. They're uncomfortable, I think, even with their own origin story at this point, and they're trying to make sense of it and also continue their rhetoric of downgrading the empire, the standing cultural capital, and uplifting their particular kind of permutation that they want to win out exclusively. And so there's a lot more rigor around that going on as you start reading the writings, especially as you get up into Tertullian, where he denounces the best and highest and most, cherished achievements of the classical Mediterranean world. He basically just trashes it all. And so that's where it got to. And we know that from sources as well. As Christianity started to take hold, a lot of these old forms were being destroyed, older libraries destroyed, older, statuary even. There was a major campaign to de-paganize, so to speak. I don't like the word pagan at all in academic discourse because I think it's a pejorative
Yeah.
And it really doesn't apply at all. And so it's us perpetuating a stereotypical idea, and none of the ancients would have accepted it. Cicero was no pagan. Plato was no pagan. This is a trope that meant hick or Philistine or savage or something like this, an unrefined person. And they're anything but. And so, anyway, so you see in the 2nd century, this campaign, and 3rd century, this ratcheting up campaign of denigrating the standing cultural capital and having it be eclipsed by the Christian mythos system.
And so the apologist I bumped into say, yeah, well, Justin's just trying to get out of a tight spot. He wants to say whatever makes them feel good so they're not on his back and trying to martyr him or kill him.
Oh, yeah. So I think that's a disingenuous argument. And basically, you're calling him a liar at that point. You're saying that he's not being honest. And now, you might say that, like, for instance, in the New Testament, where there's mythological content going on and people are it's clearly that this is not an honest effort at discourse at that kind of literalist level. But he's giving a treatise. He means business with what he's writing. This is serious stuff. People are dying. He wants to present this correctly, and he's willing to die himself. So these are his strongest arguments in the face of the greatest contestation that movement had ever seen. And so he's getting very rigorous and honest there. The idea that he's there playing games with what he's saying or trying to pass things off in some kind of Mars Hill speech or something like they say with Paul in terms of, the unknown God, and that's not what's going on with him. He means what he's saying. And so the problem is that he has to somehow denigrate the prior. He's saying, oh, this builds on that. And there's nothing new. The translation of Jesus is not new in comparison to these others.
Should I read it real quick?
Go right
I might
ahead.
butcher some of the names of the deities and figures, but when we affirm that the Logos, God's firstborn Son begotten without a sexual union, namely our teacher Jesus Christ, was crucified, died, rose, and ascended to heaven, we are conveying nothing new with respect to those whom you call the sons of Zeus. Hermes, the interpreting word and teacher of all, Asclepius, who, though he was a great healer, was struck by a thunderbolt and so ascended to heaven, and Dionysus too, after he had been torn limb from limb, and Heracles, once he had committed himself to the flames to escape his toils, and the sons of Leda, and the Dioscuri, and Perseus, son of Danae, and Bellerophon, who, though sprung from mortals, rose to heaven on the horse Pegasus. For what shall I say of Ariadne, and those like her, who have been declared to be set among the stars? And what about the emperors who die among you, whom you deem worthy to be forever immortalized, and for whom you bring forth someone who swears to have seen Caesar, once having been consumed by fire, ascend into heaven from a funeral pyre?
Yeah. So the thing that's absent there is, from our standpoint, now the ancient reader would have understood exactly what all that meant. Those were the big heroes of old. Those were the archetypal figures. Everyone knew what everyone in the ancient world, in the classical Greco-Roman world, understood exactly who those people were. Just like you understand great people in our own, in our own cultural world today, Davy Crockett or whatever. These would have been the symbols, the major symbols in symbolic iconographic figures of that world, demigods. And so these were the Hall of Fame of great individuals. And so he's pulling from that there and wants to, and arrays Jesus right alongside them. We're not doing anything new. Exactly the same, exactly the same, exactly the same. And he doesn't back off of that. What he does do, though, eventually, is he says, but all of those antecedents, well, that was demons. They knew that Jesus was coming. And so they proleptically, try to interfere or sabotage that message, so the pure message wouldn't get through to all of us. Basically, so I would be here giving you this discussion. And so, yeah.
So he is equating, but he's saying ours is better, even though it is like yours. Ours is better, and he is saying it's like yours, and that's why you have other sources here, Tertullian and others, who are doing the same thing. But you have a source. Would you want to get into that source, or do we want to talk about Kelsus a little, then get into that source?
Yeah. So I would say, so the other sources are there, and maybe in a subsequent episode we can get into each one, and they're very interesting, each one, but none of them walks back on this. None of them, begins a historiological kind of case. To the contrary, none of them does the work to get out of it that you would expect.
I do want to emphasize something that I read when I read that Justin's confession, is just to emphasize, well, what is he going to back out on? What do you mean historiological? For someone who might just be tuning in the middle of this, is that when we affirm that the Logos, God's firstborn son, begotten without a sexual union, he's adding in the birth narrative, he's adding in the idea of him being the Logos, he's adding him into being the teacher, that he was crucified, died, rose, and ascended to heaven. That whole, what do you call that? The tradition, that's our creed. This is nothing new. And that's what he's saying. So people are wondering, like, the death, burial, resurrection. No, that literally happened. But those others are myths. That's not what's happening here.
No. And it's not what's happening anywhere in Justin or any of the early fathers for what I could see. And so, I'll challenge my viewers, go ahead and look. Where's that historiological case happening? I don't see it. I've been pouring through it. Now, it's hard to make an argument from it didn't exist, but I've been looking at this for 20 years and I haven't found it. So.
And we will tackle the idea of these being memoirs and like what that means too. For some reason, Christians have been going, but they say these are memoirs, as if that somehow means like these are the real actual memories of what literally happened or something. So we're going to get into
let's get into that too
later. Yeah.
So I want to read to you. So I don't want to gloss over that, but that tradition continues beyond Justin. It's not just him having a mic problem or something. He begins with that argument, and they carry that baton forward and continue that same argument in various kind of ways going forward, and it doesn't go away. And let's roll forward now. So that's around, say, Justin's around 150, 145, whatever, when he's writing there. Let's roll forward to around 300. So here we have another apologist, falling very much in the tradition of orthodoxy and falling very much in the tradition of Justin Martyr and all these other predecessors, many of whom I list in the book. Now, those are just examples, and so you can go further and list more, but I didn't find any exceptions. Okay, so this is Arnobius of Sicca, and so this is written around 300 thereabouts. He says in his apology, he says, Father Romulus himself. This is the founder of Rome and kind of the basis for some of my research here, who was torn in pieces by the hands of 100 senators. Do you not call him Quirinus Martius? And do you not honor him with priests and with divine couches? And do you not venerate him in your most spacious temples? And in addition to all this, do you not confess that he has ascended into heaven? Either, therefore, you too are to be laughed at, who regard as gods men slain by the most heinous executions. Or, if there be sure ground for your thinking that you should do so, allow us also to feel assured for what causes and on what grounds we do the same thing. I don't know how you get out of that. You either have to take him serious, or there's this mass conspiracy, extending all the way back through all of it, and they follow in lockstep with each other, and the argument doesn't go away. In fact, if anything, it just galvanizes.
That's exactly what I'm seeing. So source after source after source after source is fitting what you're describing here. Arguing Justin's just trying to get out of a pickle, so he's making this up. First of all, you're denigrating a church father by doing this. And then you're also like not recognizing the several other sources that are doing the same thing. Is everybody just trying to get out of a pickle for 400 years? What's going on?
They couldn't get out of it because that was the context. They had no counter argument to that because, in fact, that was the case in my book, that was the initial intended reading anyway, for starters. And so they're not going to walk away from that. And the ancient readers and people that they were in discussion with that were contesting the religion would never have been persuaded by anything else. They didn't have any stronger than that. That was as strong as it got.
So this leads us into Kelsus, because this is a powerful point. Early church critics. Yeah. I mean, they're already dealing with critics. They're dealing with their own infighting. They're dealing with people who are trying to kill them. That's probably the bigger issue they're dealing with. It's like they're actually being killed. But Kelsus is a huge name. My buddy Gnostic Informant loves to look into Kelsus. But what is going on with Kelsus and Tertullian? What is the argument here? You're saying they can't get out of it, and it's so obvious. He would look like a liar if he wasn't trying to compare Jesus at this point, it seems.
Yeah, the discussion there, you got Origen and Kelsus, right? And that's kind of where we're able to even recover what Kelsus wrote, is by picking apart the quotations that are, systematically given in Origen. At least we presume so. I'm sure there's missing content there, and I'd love to have Origen. It. But yeah. And so if you go back into the works of Origen, you can read there his response to Kelsus, and Kelsus is a critic. He's like Lucian of Samosata. In fact, those guys kind of traveled in similar circles, and so he's cynical of all this. He's a critic. He does not accept that the doorbell just rang.
So, Dr. Miller, what's going on with Origen and Kelsus? Because he's an early critic of Christianity in the vein of what we've been discussing.
Yeah. Now, just so you know, I'm a great fan of Kelsus. I kind of come out of that spirit myself. I'm not necessarily, vehement against the religion. I don't know what fueled him from day to day, but definitely a critic. And so I appreciate his writings, and we get them kind of preserved for us systematically in the writings of Origen. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of anything that was anti-Christian probably got burnt and deliberately not surviving. But he quotes him systematically in his text and tries to take him down and address his points. And so from there, we're able to reconstruct, the Kelsus's, case against Christianity. And, he points out these analogs in there, evidently. I have the references there, and points out that, okay, if you're doing the same thing and we're not taking that stuff quite so seriously in any kind of historical, in that way, and holding it true in any strong way, then why are you guys claiming this and that about Jesus' resurrection? And so Origen is then put into a place where he needs to try to respond to that. That's a fair critique, right?
And he responds by saying, Jesus is nothing like these other figures, right? He just tells them flat out, like, this is unique, this really happened, all those didn't, right?
No, actually, there is a little bit of that, but it's more rhetorical than actual historiological. And so it's more like just trying to say, well, these are oftentimes Origen falls back on arguments that these are our beliefs, that in order to be part of our community, these are the things that we believe, et cetera, et cetera. He'll hark back to really mushy kinds of ideas about the prophets predicted Jesus and that legitimates him, or the Jesus story is older. You'll find this in a variety of the early apologists as well, that ours is more ancient, or that the Jesus story is somehow more sanitary. It doesn't include the foibles and sexual, frolicking of Zeus and this kind of thing, that you've got a more ascetic kind of belief system there, but you don't get back to any kind of historiological argument. And worse, they don't try to walk out of it, to do that extra work that would be necessary to really extricate it from the translation fable topos. And that's really what I was trying to look for there. And I wanted an honest answer to it. I didn't try to get the data to agree with what I wanted it to disagree with me, and I couldn't get it to disagree with me. And so I'll challenge your viewers, go back there and read that stuff yourself, and give it a read. And if you're honest about it, it's not giving the kind of arguments that modern Christian apologists would hope to see there, conspicuously absent across the board. And so
I think people need to reinvestigate.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I hope you liked my dad, Richard Miller, in this interview. Remember to like and subscribe. And never forget, we are MythVision.